Hi Essex, this is your topic lesson for Tuesday the 9th of February. And we've been thinking about mountains, so I'd like to carry on thinking about mountains, but I'd like to think about mountain climates in particular. Okay, so we're going to be thinking about the difference between weather and climate. We're going to be thinking about what it would be like to live on or near to a mountain. So you can see in this picture, we've got some little huts there, people living very close to a mountain range. What would it be like? It looks very beautiful from what I can see. So, what I'd like you to be able to do is to describe a mountainous climate. That's the aim, and for you to be successful, I'd like you to be able to say what the weather is usually like on a mountain, compare mountain climates, and list some of the risks associated with a mountain climate. So first of all, what is the difference between weather and climate? Well, weather is the short-term conditions. It's what you can see out of the window. So if it suddenly starts raining, that's the weather. Okay, it can change minute to minute, hour to hour, season to season. Is it raining? Is it sunny? So people look at the weather forecast to try and predict what is the weather going to do. Okay, so that's your short-term weather conditions, what it's actually doing when you look out of the window. Now, climate is the average conditions over an extended period of time in a certain location. So what do we expect the weather to be like in a certain place? So for example, we know from living in this country for lots of years that we might expect snow in January, and we expect it to be nice and hot in June or July. And that's because we've studied the weather over extended periods of time, and that's what we expect it to do. So the climate is the conditions or what you can expect in a certain place. And that's because it's been studied over a period of time. Okay, the weather is how it just changes minute to minute, and you can't always know what it's going to do. It will suddenly start raining, and that can happen up a mountain quite often. So let's have a look at two very different mountain ranges. So at the top, you've got the Alps. Now that is a mountain range in Europe, and it's mainly, the climate there is mainly dry and cold. Okay, and some of the mountains in that mountain range stay covered in snow all the year round. Okay, and lots of people like to go skiing there, and it's famous for being snowy and for being cold. Now, underneath that, I found a picture of a mountain range called the Andes. Now, that is in South America, and that mountain range runs all along the western part of the whole continent. It goes through many countries, and the climate there is very diverse. It's very, very different in different parts. So the northern part of the Andes, which is closer to the equator, it can actually be rainy and warm in parts of those mountains. Whereas in the southern part, it's rainy and cold. And in the central part, actually, some parts of that mountain range are very dry. Some parts of the Andes actually border the rainforest. So the Andes mountain range has a really, really, really diverse climate, depending on which parts of the mountains. So the climates in different mountains can be really, really different. And like we said, the climate is what the weather is doing over a more extended period of time. Okay, so let's have a little think about mountain environment and what the mountain environment is like. Well, we've said that the climate on a mountain can be different depending which mountains, but as you get higher, the temperature on the mountain will always become colder. Okay, mountains do tend to have much wetter climates than the surrounding land. Okay, so it tends to be wetter on mountains, and it definitely gets colder the higher up you go. Mountain weather conditions can change very, very quickly. So that's why we talked about when you're writing your guide to climbing a mountain, you need all sorts of different clothing for the weather. Now we know that you need waterproofs because, as we said, it's much wetter, tends to be much wetter on a mountain, but the weather can change really, really quickly. Okay, it can suddenly be very, very wet, or suddenly be very, very cold, or suddenly be very, very foggy. Okay, in just a few minutes, a thunderstorm could roll in when the sky was perfectly clear just a few minutes ago, or suddenly the temperature can really, really drop. Okay, so that's why it can be quite hazardous on mountains. Okay, so if you were considering climbing a mountain, we talked about this last week, why is it so dangerous? What are the risks? So obviously you can get very, very low temperatures. The higher you get, the colder the temperature gets, and hypothermia could set in quite quickly. Now, if you're living in a mountainous environment, bad weather, or if you're travelling, bad weather could leave you stranded or cause road accidents. And because the weather can get bad really, really quickly, that can be very dangerous. Bad weather can cause power cuts. You can get avalanches or landslides. As you go higher and higher up a mountain, you can get something called altitude sickness, where your body is struggling to acclimatise. It can make you feel really, really ill. There's all sorts of different wild animals, obviously, different animals that you wouldn't get in other places. And there's not going to be such good access to things like hospitals or schools. Okay, so those are the sorts of things that could make it very tricky to live on a mountain. So if you're mountain climbing, these are the things that we talked about. That can be a real risk. Obviously, if you do get an injury, there's going to be a hospital halfway up a mountain. Okay, so the reason that we're talking about all of this is I would like you to have a think about whether or not you would like to live in the mountains. I'd like you to do some research using the websites that I'm going to put linked to the video. So do some research about what it's like to live in the mountains. I'm going to read you something that I found. This is somebody that moved from one part of America to another. And this person was listing the pros and cons of living in a mountain. So listen up. It says, several years ago, my parents sold my childhood home in the suburbs of Chicago and they moved to the mountains of Colorado. It's a pretty magical place. Look outside the windows and in addition to expansive open sky and seemingly limitless greenery, you may see an elk gnawing on the grass, as my dad calls them, nature's landscapers, or an eagle perched on the top of a tree. Living in the mountains definitely has its perks, as anyone who lives there will tell you. But it's not all animal sightings and soaring eagles. If you're planning on moving up in altitude and living in mountain life, just make sure that you know all the pros and cons. So now she's going to go on to tell us. So one of the very exciting and lovely things about living in the mountains, it's a natural paradise, as we've seen from all the beautiful pictures. From forest slopes to desert peaks. If you're living in the mountains, you're living in a place of idyllic beauty. Plants and animals live much more freely on mountains, where populations are less dense and there are considerably fewer buildings. If you get far enough away from the city, you're likely to come upon the most magnificent night sky that you'll ever see. If you're someone who loves nature in all its purity, this is a massive pro of mountain living, maybe all you need. What are some of the cons then of living on the mountains? Well, we've talked about some of the dangers, we've talked about some of the lack of facilities and access to things like schools or medical facilities, and in fact you wouldn't have all your friends living nearby. Also, it's not very easy to build. Building a new home on a mountain or adding to an existing one is incredibly difficult and incredibly expensive. So it's difficult to build there. Another great thing about living in the mountains is that you get lots of privacy. It's very remote. You're not going to be up against your neighbours. You're not going to have any noise to worry about or parking to worry about. So people that appreciate peace and quiet and a little slice of nature, it might be good for them. A con though of living in the mountains, steep roads, unpaved roads or no roads. Very difficult to get things like deliveries, very difficult to get in and out sometimes. So if you want to travel anywhere. So you can find all of your own information and have a think about what are the pros and cons and would you actually like it. So explain your reasons first of all. The final one that she's written about is unbeatable views. She said it's absolutely breathtaking when you look out of your window. She said, to begin with, the high altitude did mess with my lungs though, and it did take me quite a time to adjust, but there is something so unique and special about living in the mountains. Okay, so I'd like you to have a think, like I said, do a bit of research yourself. Like I said, all the different mountain ranges are pretty different actually, but find out what it's like to maybe live in a couple of the different mountain ranges. Maybe you could look at the Andes or the Alps and just see what mountain life would be like, and then make your decision. Would you like it? Would you like to live in the mountains? Would those views, panoramic, idyllic views and all that closeness to nature, would that be worth being far away from all the perks of living in a city and all the things that you can do living in a city? Okay, I hope you find it interesting, Year 6.